The Italian Radio Hour is sponsored by Istituto Mondo Italiano.
Buonasera a tutti, good evening and welcome to the Italian Radio Hour. Io sono Viviana.
E io sono Caterina. We would like to welcome back all our regular listeners and also welcome back any new listeners and anyone listening online at khbradio.com. Also, be sure to like us on Instagram and Facebook at the Italian Radio Hour, and please subscribe to our YouTube channel to catch up on any past episodes.
Vorrei dare il benvenuto ai nostri ascoltatori da tutto il mondo. Grazie per essere con noi anche oggi mentre continuiamo il nostro viaggio per l'Italia e la cultura italiana.
Last week we had a really wonderful conversation with two guests. We had Mariana Gatto, who is the executive director and co-founder of the Italian American Museum of Los Angeles. And we also spoke with Melissa Marinaro, the director of the Italian American program at the Senator John Heinz History Center here in Pittsburgh. They discussed the differences and similarities between the patterns of Italian immigration to the West Coast and immigration to the East Coast of the United States. But before we get to our guest tonight, let's find out the meaning or the answer to last week's trivia question. Viviana, what is the meaning of "O mangi questa minestra" o ti butti dalla finestra?
Well, if you really want to translate this expression literally, it is either you eat the soup or you jump out of the window. It is indeed a very colloquial and common expression. Maybe the equivalent, either my way is my way or the highway, but I would actually say take it or leave it. Which means we have also another synonymous expressions. Questo è quello che passa il convento. This is what the convent is serving today. So beggars can be chooser. Okay, so either take it or leave it.
Very interesting. A very nice way to say that. Tonight, we're going to focus on a region of Italy that many Americans are not familiar with. The region is located in the northeast corner of the country, and it's called Friuli Venezia Giulia. And to start our show, we're going to be talking with a very special guest. His name is Lou Del Bianco. He's an actor, a singer, a storyteller, and an author, and he will tell us the story of his grandfather, Luigi Del Bianco, who is an immigrant from Friuli, Venezia, and he was the chief stone carver of the presidential faces of the Mount Rushmore National Monument.
But prima, pubblicità. Do you want to learn, improve, or master your Italian? Istituto Mondo Italiano can help. Located in the heart of Regent Square, Mondo Italiano offers small group classes and one-on-one private tutoring to help you learn Italian in no time. Visit us online at www.istitutomondoitaliano.org. Well, welcome back, everyone. I am very honored to introduce tonight's first guest. Lou Del Bianco is an award-winning actor, singer, storyteller, and author, a 5-time winner of the Parents' Choice Award, and Lou has authored a young reader's historical novel and a screenplay about the carving of Mount Rushmore. He presents living history programs to school students from pre-K through 12th grade and has created a program on Abraham Lincoln that has been endorsed by the Lincoln Bicentennial Committee. In 2018, he published his first non-fiction book, Out of Rushmore's Shadow, the Luigi Del Bianco story, that chronicles the struggles he endured to get official recognition for his grandfather's contributions in the creation of the iconic Mount Rushmore National Monument. Benvenuto al nostro programma. Buonasera, Lou. How are you?
Buonasera, Viviana. It's great to be here. Thank you for having me.
Well, last time we actually saw each other because you performed at Istituto Mondo Italiano in 2018. It was a full house. It was a tremendous performance and story that you shared with all of us. And so I hope that at some point our professional lives are going to cross paths again and maybe to repeat the experience. We just keep our fingers crossed. But tonight we have you all for us for about a half hour before you head out to, I believe you have a speaking engagement. So we're going to get into a little bit of talking about your background first. So family, 6 daughters and 1 boy. Is that correct?
That is 100% correct.
So is that where the Manji Manjo character came about as a defense mechanism to cope with all these all these sisters around you?
Yes, Manji Manjo character was a result of needing some sort of a sanctuary from my very gregarious, wonderful sisters. Don't get me wrong. I mean, we laugh about those days. But yeah, I needed a way to express myself, so I found a tape recorder and started creating my own characters and started storytelling. But I was too shy to do it in front of people, so this was something that I did, in the bathroom.
On your own. Now, it's kind of hard to believe because obviously you're an amazing storyteller and an actor, but it's, and also in your performance. Remind me, how tall are you, Lou?
I'm 6'4".
Okay, so when these gentlemen walking into Istituto Mondo Italiano, and I knew a little bit about the story of the performance, I was wondering how such a tall gentleman could perform a child as well, because within the show, he's both the grandfather and himself. And as I said, it all goes into your early career as Manji Manjo. I think you have developed, indeed, the ability to make us believe into any of the characters that you portrayed. Let's talk about your rapport with your grandpa. My understanding is your Sunday dinners were like a steady appointment where every Sunday you would go and visit your grandfather. Is that correct?
Yes. We used to visit my nono every Sunday when I was, and again, I knew him very briefly, but he made sure that we had a bond and a connection and that I was his namesake. Mm-hmm. Every Sunday, absolutely.
There was a special thing that there is a marble bust that he carved of himself, right? You had, I don't want to say a special routine, but some sort of meaningful way of taking you to kind of put your hands around this bust.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he would take me to a table where there was this beautiful bust. I thought it was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen, and it was my grandfather's. It was his own self-portrait in beautiful white marble. And you can go to luigimountrushmore.com to my photo gallery, and you could see this incredible sculpture. And I would go on a chair, and he would take my little 5-year-old fingers and feel his marble Roman profile, and put his hat on his head. He used to use his bust as a hat rack because it fit perfectly on his head. And then after that, he would always take me by the shoulders and say, "I am Luigi, you are Luigi." Mm-hmm. And I think that very simple statement really bonded us. It was kind of a quality over quantity as far as the time spent. Mm-hmm. I felt very much connected to him. And his hugs, he was the first person I remember ever hugging me. And the hug was so filled with love. And he was not well at this time in his life. So he was, in some ways, it felt a little like a desperate hug, because I'm sure he knew he wasn't going to be around much longer. So he wanted to spend as much time with me as he could.
And I believe he died of silicosis, which is a lung disease that probably was caused by the nature of his job.
Oh, without a doubt, yeah. From his work in marble and granite, the lungs become filled with the silica from the granite dust, and he actually went quite a bit throughout the 1950s and early 60s to Italy, to a sanitarium where they would literally try to suck the dust out of his lungs, which was kind of futile at that point. One of the reasons that he went back and would spend months there was that the air in northern Italy, he went to Friuli, was much easier for him to breathe, as opposed to, I guess, New York air. Mm-hmm. But I guess the high elevation, I don't know what it is, but he just liked the air there. Mm-hmm. And silicosis did him in the end, because he was otherwise a very strong man.
We know that your grandfather was a stone carver, or a carver of granite. Can you tell our listeners a little bit about your grandfather. How did Luigi Del Bianco come to the United States? How did he become a stone carver?
Okay, great question. He was around. The legend in the family goes something like this: he was about 11 or 12. His father had a wood cutting shop. My grandfather came from a long line of wood carvers. In fact, Friuli is filled with craftsmen, skilled craftsmen, in the terrazzo artwork you see on the floors. And he started carving a little dog out of wood, and my great-grandfather, Vincenzo, saw his talent, and he literally, put my grandfather on a train and sent him to the nearest carving school, which ended up being Austria. And he studied near Vienna for 3 years under a master stone carver, an Italian, and learned the classical art of stone carving, and then 2 more years in Venice. And by 1910, I think he's 18 years old, he writes to relatives living in Barre, Vermont, who are stone carvers there, that he wants to come and live the American dream. So he looks to his family who is living in Vermont to sponsor him, and he comes over on the La Touraine. The Dante Alighieri in 1910, and he lives for 5 years in Barre, Vermont, as a memorial stone carver. And again, if you go to the website at luigimountrushmore.com, you can see photos of him in Barre, Vermont. You can see actual memorial stones that he was working on by hand. So that's just like a brief overview of, the training that he received. And he continued to train when he was in Barre as well.
And so also when he arrived, I believe he made, I think there is a cute little story about not having enough money, I think, to come off the boat. And he was detained for a couple of days. Tell us a little more about it.
Yeah, well, you basically said it. That's all I really know. You had to have $50 cash when you came over to go through Ellis Island, and he had like $40 cash. And I guess he just didn't get that memo.
And who was that actually helped him out?
So his cousin Pietro Del Bianco was there and came and gave him the money. And but it's interesting. My grandfather was detained for like 2 or 3 days. He wasn't imprisoned. He was really detained.
Just held.
Until his cousin was able to come and get him the money.
So he was held at Ellis Island for some reason.
If you didn't have enough money if you didn't have the $50 cash, you were detained until you did have the money.
So to kind of go back to just a few things, before we go back into your grandfather. How old were you, and what was the episode where you actually found out the contribution that your grandfather had made to this iconic monument?
Well, I was about 6 years old when my grandfather passed away. But again, quality over quantity. I saw him every Sunday for a couple of years, and after he passed away when I was in 2nd grade, I found a pamphlet with presidents' faces on it, and I asked my mother what it was, and it was my mother, actually, who told me that my grandfather was the chief carver. And I just, first of all, as a 7-year-old, I'm imagining my grandfather carving the whole thing by himself. Of course, what would my little 7-year-old brain think other than that, right? So I asked my mother, and this is something I was not known to do. I was so shy, so painfully shy. I wanted to tell my class about my grandpa. So I went in front of my class at 2nd grade, and I could still remember, standing in front of the class saying, I want to tell you about my grandfather or my grandpa, and then just the children's jaws just drop. It was such a moment in my life, almost like a rite of passage to have this kind of ownership of my grandfather's legacy.
But then you started to look at the material, the brochure that your mother had handed to you, and figuring out that Luigi Del Bianco was nowhere to be found. I'm sure that must have made an impact or left something in you. And despite maybe that you moved on with your acting career, it was some unfinished business that I think reemerged in your life in 1985 when the book about Mount Rushmore came out. That had no mention, so the carving of Mount Rushmore by Rex Allen Smith, they supported a completely different narrative. Maybe, I had no mentioning of your grandfather. It looked like the narrative of the book was more of, oh, look what these 400 untrained miners, taken under the wings of Borland, were able to accomplish. And someone else in your family, Uncle Caesar, is the one that was very adamant about the absence of your grandfather in the story, right?
Oh, yeah. First of all, I have to say, Viviana, you've really done your homework.
Thank you.
But really, who needs me? But you're right. My Uncle Cesare, my Uncle Caesar, was so proud of his father. I mean, I still have people coming up to me in town saying, I remember when I was in high school, when I was in school with your uncle, he was always talking to people about his dad. And so, yeah, my uncle read that book, and he was so angry. And he used the analogy that talking about my grandpa on Mount Rushmore and leaving him out was like talking about the New York Yankees and not mentioning Joe DiMaggio. That's how important my grandfather was to the carving. He was like DiMaggio was to the Yankees.
Well,
and
sorry.
That I really felt his pain, and it brought me back to my connection to my grandfather, and it also brought me back to that little boy who was lying on his bed looking for my grandpa throughout those pamphlets and not finding him. And so my uncle and I decided to try to find him ourselves. And so I took a trip to Mount Rushmore by myself and asked how my grandfather was being honored, and they just showed me that plaque of 400 names of all the, quote, workers, and just, a mere mention of my grandfather's name. My grandfather was basically being put into the same category as drillers and laborers and secretaries, with all due respect to those roles. But to me, it was like taking, a movie with the star in it, and then making that star an extra.
Can you share with our listeners exactly what was your grandfather's contribution to this massive, iconic, stone monument that sits there in South Dakota? What exactly did Luigi do? What was his role in this whole project?
Yeah. Wow. What didn't he do? He was lauded by Gutzon Borglum, who was the Danish-American sculptor who was the genius and the designer of Mount Rushmore. And he was Borglum's only chief carver, which meant many things. Number one, my grandfather oversaw the carving because many of these carvers were unemployed miners that had to be trained on the job. Borglum had a very hard time getting trained artists to carve in granite giant figures 500 feet in the air. I mean, it was dangerous. You had to be physically strong, you had to be fearless, and you had to be talented. And Luigi fit all of those prerequisites. And so the rest of the men, for the most part, with the exception of a few, were pretty much untrained. So he oversaw the carving. He trained a lot of the men in the finesse of carving. But his main purpose there was in carving the refinement of expression in the faces. Once the faces were roughed out and carved to the most point, Borglum relied only on Luigi to give the faces that quality, that aesthetic humanity, that when you look at them, you feel like they could live and breathe. That's the difference between someone who is trained to follow directions and someone who has the artistic sensibility to bring that humanity out. And that's what my grandfather did.
So then, obviously, even in records that you got access to, Borglum talks about the skills and the fact that he would entrust only Luigi Del Bianco to indeed do this type of work. His pay is 3 times higher than the regular workers, which I'm sure created also some animosity there. What, it looks like obvious to all of us. Why wasn't that written somewhere in the visitor center? So I'm sure you started a series of phone calls, right? Can you tell us a little bit about then this very long process to get them to acknowledge your grandfather's contribution, and what was the feedback or the answers you were always getting when you were trying to build the case for a recognition?
Right. So when I got back from Mount Rushmore, I had done whatever research I could do at the mountain, but there was very little there. And an author I had talked to suggested that my uncle suggested that I go to the Library of Congress in Washington, because that's where the bulk of Gutzon Borglum's papers were. So my uncle and I spent, at least 5 or 6 trips over like a 3-year period, gathering up incredible documentation, in the words of Gutzon Borglum, where Borglum complains about the fact that my grandfather was being treated poorly by the powers that be. They didn't want him there. There was chronic sabotage directed at him. And in spite of all this, Borglum convinces my grandfather to stay long enough to finish the faces. And when Mount Rushmore was shown these papers, that Borglum says that my grandfather was the only intelligent, efficient stone carver who knows the language of the sculptor, worth more than any 3 men in America, and that whenever my grandfather quit, all finishing had to stop because he was the only one that could do it. And also the fact that Borglum paid part of my grandfather's salary out of Borglum's own pocket, because my grandfather threatened to quit many times because he wasn't getting paid what he deserved. So this whole story of a really brave, strong Italian artist, not only dealing with a dangerous job, but also with friction and sabotage by the powers that be, perseveres and helps create an incredible, iconic sculpture. When Mount Rushmore saw all of these documents, they didn't want to deal with it. And the main reason was because they had invested so much into the story of the, quote, workers. They even created a workers' museum at Mount Rushmore. And the brand of this museum was basically, look what these untrained miners were able to do. Look what Borglum got them to do. Well, that doesn't gel very well with this chief carver who trained these men and also put the final finishing touches on the face. That was a threat to their story. And so they kept pushing back for literally 25 years.
Do you think that perhaps there might have been some degree of prejudice against Italian immigrants? Could that have been part of it, do you think? Or what's your opinion on that?
Yeah, it's really an opinion. I have no hard evidence in Borglum's writings, but I have, anecdotal evidence about the way I was treated by some of the staff at Mount Rushmore, saying, well, this is not New York. I kept feeling like New York was becoming a code word for Italians. That Lou Del Bianco, he's very persistent. And, he's very aggressive and this and that. And some of these subtle, he's very emotional. He's very, those kind of Italian stereotypes about the hot-blooded Italians that can't control themselves. Those things were always, there were kind of moments where you go, And even the people who we interviewed who worked with my grandfather, who absolutely loved him, kind of talked about him like he was different. Oh, well, he was a wine drinker. We were whiskey drinkers. Oh, he didn't eat the kind of things we did. He wasn't born here. So, yeah, back in the 20s and 30s, a lot of Italians were not considered white, as you probably know. Mm-hmm. And there were stereotypes back then. So somebody who spoke broken English and was totally stood out. Excuse me, I'm getting a...
Maybe a little sneeze. Okay, hold on 1 second. We're going to try to get Lou back on the phone. In the meanwhile, I will do a little commercial break. How about that? Applying for dual citizenship? Need documents translated? Istituto Mondo Italiano provides certified translation and interpretation services in 20 different languages. Be sure to visit us at www.istitutomondoitaliano.org. Well, we're back with Lou. We lost you for a second. I think you were wrapping up on the answering the Kathy's question, and we have a couple of minutes left. There was one person eventually that had seemed to have a listening ear for your story. This was the new head of the national parks in the Midwest region of the USA, Cam Sholey. And can you tell us a little bit about what he did when you presented the story that was a turning point in everything, all the events that occurred after that?
Yeah, so long story short, all of the staff members, the administrators who I dealt with for years all kept saying the same thing. We only acknowledge the carvers as a group. We don't single anyone out besides Borglum. And that was their party line. And finally, I was ready to give up, and I went to Cam Sholey, and he said, we're going to try to change this. And so he went to the staff at Rushmore and basically said to them that, this is not something I'm asking. This is something I'm telling you. We need to change the education at the mountain and acknowledge the chief carver. That the evidence from Guts and Borglum is just too overwhelming. And so he did. He was willing to stick his neck out and go against the narrative of the workers and get my grandfather a beautiful plaque, which is at Mount Rushmore now. And now, whenever there are walking tours, my grandfather's mentioned as chief carver. This is something that has never been done. He's actually been kind of unearthed or brought out of the stone, and life has been breathed back into his legacy. So,
well,
Cam, I'll always be grateful to him.
Yes, for Mr. Sholey to actually send two historians to your house to evaluate the documents, and maybe by page 3 they had enough evidence to say you have a case for them to make a recommendation. And so, as you have mentioned the website a few times, the LuigiMountRushmore.com. This is where you can see a lot of the information and also the emotional day that the plaque was unveiled. So Cam Sholey gave a powerful and a pretty emotional speech. I must say that when I was watching the video onto the website, I did shed a tear, and I can just imagine what you and the rest of your family who was all present might have felt. And your aunt gave also a speech recognizing for the recognition, and then you came to the podium where you kind of reintroduce at this point your grandfather as the chief carver of Luigi Del Bianco. And when you were talking about the hug that your grandfather gave to you, how did you feel when that plaque got unveiled?
Well, I felt like this is the first time I was able to really hug him back.
Yes, and it was...
this was my hug to him.
And so let's remember for the record, what is the date that this beautiful event, this acknowledgement finally came to fruition?
Yeah, this is right up there with my birthday. It might even be more important than my birthday. It's September 16th, 2017.
That's when history was changed for the Del Bianco, for Luigi Del Bianco's recognition. Lou, I know that you have a speaking engagement, and I cannot thank you enough. And as I said, I do hope to bring you back to Pittsburgh. I know that a couple of years, maybe a year later in 2018, there was also a Luigi Del Bianco street dedication. Your book is now also available in Italian, so people of both countries can follow the story.
Yes.
I saw also some comics that was, it just, as I said, the website gives you as close to the experience of this journey as, eventually getting to Mount Rushmore could be. Any new projects? Would you see this story as a movie, as a motion picture?
Yeah, I wrote a screenplay back in 2010, and I've been shopping it ever since then. And I've got a producer that I'm working with now. It's been a struggle because Mount Rushmore, unfortunately, represents some things to people that has been hampering interest. And that is the fact that, there's controversy surrounding Mount Rushmore as far as, the fact that two of the faces on the mountain were slave owners, and this is a move to kind of erase history. And a lot of the sentiment in Hollywood is against bringing that kind of story to life, the story about Mount Rushmore. But I'm not giving up. I'm in it for the long haul, and I'm hoping that maybe this phase will fizzle out a little bit, and people will maybe open their minds and hearts up a little more to a wonderful story, a very American immigrant story.
Definitely, you have shown so much perseverance in kind of the first round to get the plaque. I'm sure that you still have some additional perseverance for chapter 2 of this story.
Yeah, it might take another 25 years, but that's okay. I'm sticking around.
You're full of life. Well, thank you again very much, and I look forward to seeing you in the near future. Grazie mille, buona serata.
Oh, grazie to you as well. Sono molto grato. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
So now we're going to go on and continue with our voyage into the Friuli, Venezia Giulia region by speaking with our next guest. He is Michael Pauls. Along with his wife, Dana Facaros, Michael Pauls has been writing travel guides and apps for over 40 years. Nicknamed the dynamic duo of travel writing, they have over 40 titles in print under the Cadogan Travel Guide series, including guides to France, Italy, Spain, Greece, and Turkey, as well as regional and city guides. Michael and his wife are also contributors to the United Kingdom publications The Sunday Times Travel Magazine, and the Daily Telegraph, and they've also contributed to National Geographic Magazine. Known for their tongue-in-cheek approach to travel writing, they have also written travel guides, amazingly, to Mars and to Hell. So in case you're planning on going to those two places, you'd be all set picking up one of his books. He's also published a collection of twisted tales from history, art, science, food, and toilet folklore under the title Titmice, Turks, and Marinated Mummies. He recently shared his take on Trieste, the city of coffee and culture, and the main city in this region, in the article Trieste, A Different Side of Italy. And this was published in the April and May issue of the magazine Dreams of Italy. Michael, welcome to our show.
Thank you. Grazie mille, è un vero piacere stare qui con voi.
Grazie a lei. Can you tell our listeners how your career in travel writing began?
Completely by accident. I started out as in town planning. I worked in inner city neighborhood groups in Cleveland, and my wife Dana Facaros got me in all this trouble. She
wives do that all the time.
She was in England, and who needed someone to write a guidebook to the Greek islands, and they gave her 200 pounds and sent her on her way, and she did a very good job of it. And then she never thought anything would happen because it was a very small publisher. So she came to Cleveland, and we got married there. And then 2 years later, they called back and said, well, would you like to write more books? And we had a baby by then. And so I had to come along and push the baby stroller and write half the book.
So obviously to write about places, have you always written about places that you lived in, or sometimes it's a collection? Mm-hmm.
Our publisher Cadogan always wanted us to live in the country, so we lived in Italy for a few years while we were writing about Italy, and we brought up our children there, and later in France. And when we ran out of Italy, we wish there were more Italy.
Let's go and do something about it. Let's create another Italy.
Create another region, right?
Is there any, although today's conversation is going to be focused more on Friuli in general and Trieste in the specifics, are there any other areas of Italy that you have spent time or they're on top of your list of places to go that maybe people might not know about?
You know, when people ask me what my favorite place in Italy is, I tell them Ferrara.
Ferrara,
and they look at
yes.
me. They look at me as if I was strange. It's a wonderful Renaissance city. It's full of art, and there's just an air about it that I love. I know it has millions of mosquitoes and lots of fog, but if I lived in Italy, that's where I'd go.
Wonderful. So you started also collaboration with Kathy McCabe of Dreams of Italy, and the article that you wrote recently in their April-May issue for the members that subscribe to the site Focus on Trieste. Before we dive into Trieste itself, could you give us an overall view of the region, where it's located, the main cities, what people can expect from Friuli Venezia Giulia, maybe where the name came from?
The name came from Julius Caesar. Long ago, when the Lombards ruled that part of the world, they made their capital in a town called Forum Iuli, the market of Julius Caesar, because he founded it. And that the Forum Iuli got twisted over the centuries into Friuli.
And what people can expect from the landscape that they might not find in other regions? I know that the Friuli is also famous for a lot of products that are indigenous of the area. Obviously, a wide variety of wines, and I have my usual three: the SPR, the Schioppettino, and Collio. We have prosciutto San Daniele. We have the knives. Although it's not really. I mean, it's a man-made product. The knives, but from the landscape, what would people should expect from Friuli Venezia Giulia?
Well, it's a very small region, but there's a little bit of everything in it. It's one of the places in Italy where, if you really want to, you can ski and swim on the same day, because it goes up to the Alps, the Carnian Alps and the Julian Alps, and there's plains full of rich agriculture in between, and art cities, and then there's a coast with two very lovely urbane resorts, Grado and Lignano Sabbiadoro. So there's a little bit of everything.
This region of Italy is quite interesting because for quite a while it really wasn't even part of Italy. Isn't that correct? Wasn't it part of the I'm going to pronounce this wrong, Austro-Hungarian Empire?
Yes, it wasn't until World War I. Trieste was the only big port, well, the only port at all of this great empire. And the 18th and 19th centuries, it boomed. It became a big industrial center. It had a little bit of everything. It was the empire's window on the world. It had trading links and with just about everywhere in Asia. You could step on a boat in Trieste and go to Bombay.
And how did Venice take that? Was there a competition between the two ports?
Well, yeah, 1,000 years of it. The Venetians beat down Trieste when they were in their heyday, and they made sure that Trieste could never become a real rival. But Trieste got its revenge under the Austrians when they made it a free port. Which was a brilliant move. That was we'll go way back as Emperor Karl VI who did that, and as soon as he did, goods started pouring in from all over the world, and the Austrians finally had the port that the big city that they'd always wanted.
Can you comment on the influence of the Austro-Hungarian Empire on perhaps the cuisine or the culture or the how did that influence Trieste?
Trieste is in the Austrian days. Trieste was in the middle of everything, and the wars and the Iron Curtain put an end to all that. But and now it's coming back to what it used to be a little bit. Slovenia is only a few miles away, and Croatia is only a little farther. Austria is just over the Alpine passes, and so there are times in Trieste where you think you were in Austria. The cuisine is not so much pasta. There's lots of sausages and dumplings and lots of good beer from over the Alps. And the culture, they love music in Trieste. There used to be an Austrian opera house and an Italian opera house, and they're both still working today. They have music festivals pretty much through the year. Like the hinterlands of the Carso, there's the plateau that's just above the city. Most of the people there are Croatian, and they have their traditional inns called Osmice there, where you can go and try a little Slovenian style cooking, which is pretty good, by the way.
Well, we'll definitely have. I'm counting my days because this is a territory that I would like to explore during my summer vacation this year. Now, it's not a music festival, but it's definitely an event that people look forward to in October. That's the regatta, the Barcolana. Can you tell us a little bit about what happens? It seems to be a pretty big event.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, people come from all over the world to sail in it. There's various events. There's various races involved in it, and most of them run right along the shore where people can see them. And there's big crowds about it, and there's lots of food and wine, as you can imagine, and everything that the Triestini need to have a good time.
Illy Coffee Company is located in Trieste, and in fact, Riccardo Illy was the former CEO of the company and was previously the mayor of Trieste. We think about the coffee culture in Italy. There's also a coffee culture in Vienna, Austria. How does the coffee culture impact the city of Trieste?
Well, Vienna only got its coffee from Trieste. They were, and they still are, the biggest coffee port in the world. And they have not only Illy, which is a big concern, but they have a lot of private people who roast and grind their own coffee and sell it locally. And they do take it very seriously. They say there's 67 different ways of ordering a coffee in Trieste.
La Caffè degli Specchi. There is this poster where you can count them.
Really? Okay.
How many have you tried?
I also heard there's a university, the Università del Caffè. There's also a
I
university there,
haven't
too?
tried them all yet,
Oh, okay.
but well, if I get to go back, I want to try all 67.
Yes, the Coffee University is still something organized by Italy. They have different courses on chocolate, coffee, and other things. If we were to walk around Trieste, what are some of the sites that we would be seeing? I was on the on Google Maps trying to get myself around, and I saw this very unique arch that kind of sticks out of a building. I believe you know which one I'm referring to.
Arco di Riccardo.
Exactly. Yes, that's very unique. All of a sudden, you have a modern building and then this historical arch coming out of it.
Well, the people in Trieste say that the Riccardo was Richard the Lionheart, the King of England, who was captured by the Austrians on his way back from the Crusades. But historians say maybe not, and they really don't know who built it. It's probably a lot older. It's probably a Roman thing.
Mm-hmm. Some other sites, there's also a bumpy cobblestone street that takes you up to the cathedral.
Yeah,
I guess you don't want to do it on a bicycle or high heels.
No, don't do that. Take the bus. Take the 24 bus. You don't want to walk up that hill. It's Trieste is in a way different from almost all the other cities in Italy. It doesn't have a lot of medieval buildings to look at. It doesn't even have a lot of churches. The most impressive church in the whole city is Serbian Orthodox. To give you an idea of the diversity that was in there, and from the Austrian times, there were all sorts of people living in Trieste. It was mostly built in the 1700s and the 1800s, it instead of, though it has its fair share of art and museums, it's actually a city that's crazy about culture. But it's still somehow it's more the atmosphere of the place than any specific things to see. It's a town that really likes to have fun. It's a city that knows how to drink, which is pretty rare in Italy.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned that up until World War I, Trieste wasn't even part of Italy, and it wasn't until after World War I that it became a part of the boot. Can you talk a little bit about what was Trieste like under fascism in the 1920s and during World War II?
It was sad and poor, and it stayed that way until very recent, until the coming of the European Union. In fact, it was Jan Morris, the great travel writer,
yes,
wrote her last book about Trieste, and it's subtitled "The Meaning of Nowhere." And what she meant by that was really a place that had seen its whole reason for being taken away from it. It wasn't the empire's window on the world anymore. It was its industry started to decline. Its great shipping lines started to decline. Things were going very bad, and the bad actors, especially a certain Mr. Mussolini, took advantage on that to pit people against each other, mostly pitting the Italian part of the population against the Slovenians, and that actually Mussolini's black shirts really got their start and got their training in Trieste, beating up people that they didn't like, and in 1919, 1920, and they used what they learned there to bully the rest of Italy.
Yeah, actually, it's interesting. There's a bit of infamy about Trieste. There is a place called Risiera San Saba. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Oh, yeah. It's the only Nazi extermination camp on Italian soil. It's in an old rice mill in the suburban part of town next to a supermarket. After the coup, when they arrested Mussolini and Italy pulled out of the war, the Nazis took over the whole region, along with the rest of northern Italy, and a really horrible character, one of the most vicious of all the Nazis, a born Triestino, an Austrian of Austrian blood, and with a Slovenian name, Odilo Globachnik. He doesn't get enough credit in history. He's one of the authors of the Holocaust. And when he was through doing his dirty work up north in Germany and Poland, they sent him down to Trieste, and it was late in the war. And he lived in a bunker. They call it the Little Berlin now. You can take a tour of it. And on the other side of town, he set up this camp, which never had a lot of people. Most of the Jews in Trieste had a very large Jewish population. They were mostly shipped up to the camps in Germany, but a lot of them lost their lives at the Risiera. And when the Allies were closing in on the city, the Nazis took it all apart and tried to hide all the evidence, but there was enough to understand what had really happened there.
Among some of the people that embraced Trieste like home, we cannot not mention Joyce, also Kafka and Svevo. I'm sure the Triestini feel pretty proud about that, right, of being the home to Joyce. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's a statue of Joyce, life-size, walking over a little bridge on their Canal Grande. Trieste has to have a Canal Grande, just like Venice. They're rivals. And he's just looks like an average man, looking sort of quizzically at you as you pass him by. And he come to teach languages with Berlitz.
Yes, probably to get back.
Back in 1905, and he felt right at home there. If it not for World War I, he might never have left. Mm-hmm. He had children there. He spoke to them in Triestino dialect.
Mm-hmm. And so we have really 30 seconds, but there is something that you have onto your website that can be downloaded, is the app Italian Food Decoder. Can you tell us what it is and how people can use it? And again, we have about 30 seconds before having to go into the closing.
Oh, okay, I'll talk fast. We're very proud of that. It started out as just a menu translator between English and Italian, but we just got carried away with it, and now it's got thousands of entries, and it's like a little course in Italian cooking besides just a translator. And it's full of stories. It's just about it's a good reference to anything about Italian food.
Okay.
Are we done?
We are done, and we will definitely put a link onto the thank you post that we'll do on Facebook. But it is time for us to say buonanotte, since it's midnight your time in France. And thank you very much for giving us this nice virtual tour of Trieste tonight.
Well, unfortunately...
Oh, it's a pleasure. I wish I could be in Pittsburgh with you.
Soon enough,
city.
because someone close to Istituto Mondo Italiano, we discovered that we have some common friends. Buonanotte, di nuovo grazie.
Buonanotte. Well, unfortunately, our hour is almost up.
E il Big Ben ha detto stop.
It's time for us to say arrivederci e alla prossima. We want to thank you all for tuning in to the program. If you have any questions or comments, please contact us at the Italian Radio Hour at gmail.com. We'd love to hear from you. And Viviana, who's going to be our next guests?
Well, next week we'll have two guests. We'll start with Christina Bauerman. He's the chef at Glass Osteria and the only female chef with a Michelin star in Rome. She's the president of the Italian Association Ambasciatori del Gusto and a role model for women in a male profession. And our second guest will be Pierrette Simpson, a native of Pranzalaito near Torino, survivor of the shipwreck of the Andrea Doria, the Italian luxury liner that sank on July 25th, 1956, when it was struck by the Swedish liner Stockholm.
Remember, if you or any of your family or friends have missed a prior episode or would like to listen to this episode again, please visit our website at www.istitutomondoitaliano.org and click on the Italian Radio Hour tab.
Vorremmo ringraziare i nostri ospiti, Louis Del Bianco e Michael Pauls, il nostro sponsor Istituto Mondo Italiano e Elaborar per la musica. And finally, before we leave, here is our trivia question for next week. What does moglie buoi dei paesi tuoi mean? Again, what does moglie buoi dei paesi tuoi mean? You can send your answers to the Italian Radio Hour at gmail.com.
If you're not living in the Pittsburgh area or you might be out of town, remember you can catch us streaming live at khbradio.com every Thursday at 5 p.m. And be sure to like us on Instagram and Facebook at the Italian Radio Hour. Until next time, alla prossima. Ciao, ciao!
The Italian Radio Hour has been sponsored by Istituto Mondo Italiano.